In the village of Akpandem, where the red soil met tall palm trees that softly moved in the wind, and where the morning air smelled like fresh cassava bread baking nearby, there lived a woman named Adunni. She had a special gift, something that helped her but also made life hard for her. The old people in the village said she was born at a very sacred time, a magical moment when day met night, like when the sun and moon come close together. At that time, the invisible line between the world of living people and the world of spirits was very thin, as thin and delicate as a spider's web. Adunni could speak to shadows, but not the kind that play under mango trees or stretch across the ground when the sun goes down. No, she heard shadows made of memories. These were the feelings left behind after strong moments, like quiet love that never got said, deep sadness that made the heart heavy, and pure happiness that made people smile inside. These feelings were so strong, they stayed in the air like faint smells or soft whispers. The memory shadows clung to old mud walls, hid in the quiet corners of doorways, and sat on the favorite chairs of those who had died, telling their stories to anyone who would listen. And Adunni was the only one who could hear them. But having this gift came at a cost, as the old women in the village knew very well. They had lived long lives and carried in their memories many stories from the past, tales of others like Adunni, born with the same rare and mysterious ability to hear the whispers of shadows. These special people appeared once in every generation, and the elders watched them closely with a mix of respect and worry. The old women said the gift was a heavy burden, not just a blessing. Every time a shadow whispered its story into the silence, it took a little piece of the listener's light and strength away. It was as if the shadows fed quietly on their energy, leaving them weaker and more fragile with each passing day. The elders warned that many who could speak to shadows ended up lonely, worn down, or lost, because very few could understand their pain or stay by their side through the hardest times. Some gave up completely, their spirits dimming slowly, like fading stars in a darkening sky. The old women said it was a lonely path, but also a sacred one, reserved for those brave enough to carry it. By the time Adunni turned 30, the bright warmth of her skin had faded away, like morning mist hiding the sun behind a soft veil, and her eyes had grown quiet and deep, like dark pools that drank in light instead of shining it back. The villagers respected Adunni, but they were also afraid of her. They only came when they needed something important, like finding out where Papa Okoro hid the family gold before he got sick, or why young Blessing ran away in the middle of the night, or to hear the last words their loved ones left behind, whispered into the walls of their homes. They spoke quietly and looked around nervously as they walked to her small hut at the edge of the village, where the shadows seemed darker and the air was still. But as soon as they got the answers, they left quickly, their footsteps making soft sounds on the dry red dirt, disappearing among the palm trees. They never stayed to sit by her fire, where the flames flickered and warmed the night. They never shared palm wine or laughter with her. Instead, they left her alone, with the quiet voices of the shadows and the heavy secrets only she could hear. Adunni lived alone in the old house her grandfather had built long ago. Its mud walls were painted with indigo patterns that seemed to move softly whenever the lamp flickered, like quiet spirits waking in the night. The shadows inside never stopped whispering. They filled every corner of her home with voices that never let her rest. Some shadows begged her, trembling, to carry their messages to the living. Words left unsaid, goodbyes never spoken. Others wept quietly, full of sorrow and regret, asking for forgiveness that might never come. And some laughed softly, holding on to memories of children's games played in sunlit courtyards, now swallowed by tall, wild elephant grass. The weight of all those voices pressed on Adunni's heart every day, making her feel both needed and deeply alone. Each time the villagers came and got what they wanted, they hurried away without a word, as if afraid to stay too long near the strange woman who heard things no one else could. They never sat by her fire, never shared their palm wine or laughter. When their footsteps finally faded down the dusty road, silence fell heavy, and Adunni was left once again only with the shadows, with their endless whispering that filled the empty rooms and wrapped around her like a cold, lonely blanket. One dry season, everything changed in Akpandem. The harmattan wind came blowing strong. This wind is special. It carries tiny red dust all across the land, making everything look like it's covered in a soft, dusty blanket. The big baobab tree in the middle of the village, so old that it seemed to remember hundreds of stories, creaked and groaned as if it was trying to tell a secret. That was the very day a stranger came to the village. He showed up right when the village was celebrating the Yam Festival. This festival is a huge, joyful party where everyone gives thanks for the new yams they just harvested. The drums beat deep and slow, like the steady heartbeat inside your chest when you feel excited or scared. The air smelled like something warm and yummy. Roasted yams cooking over hot fire and palm oil sizzling softly, filling the whole village with its rich, sweet scent. The stranger's name was Emeka. He wasn't just any visitor, he was a master woodcarver. He carried special tools that told their own story. His chisels were smooth and round, like river stones polished by flowing water for years. They looked soft, but they were sharp enough to cut wood perfectly. His hammer wasn't just any hammer. It fit his hand like it was made just for him, as if it was part of his body. But the most special thing was his eyes. They were bright and kind, and they could see beauty in plain pieces of wood that others might see as just sticks. To Emeka, every piece of wood was hiding a story, waiting to be carved and brought to life. Like magic, he could turn a simple log into something wonderful, full of meaning and soul. Some people only see the beauty after the wood has been carved into a statue or a bowl. They wait until the work is finished to understand how special it is. But a woodmaker like Emeka is different. Even when he looks at a plain, rough piece of wood, just a raw tree, he can see the whole sculpture inside it, like a secret picture waiting to come alive. He doesn't need the finished work to feel the beauty. He sees it right from the start. Emeka was the best woodcarver in all the 7 villages form the village of Makoro, a place far, far from Akpandem. People had heard about his amazing skill, how his hands could turn plain pieces of wood into beautiful, smooth art that seemed alive. Because of this, the village chief, Nwosu, sent for him from that faraway land. The old masks had become worn out from many years of being worshipped, so Emeka came to carve new ones. He set up his small workshop under the tall Irako tree, where the soft morning sunlight made the wood glow, and then he began his work. One day, while walking through the village, Adunni saw a man she had never met before. There was something about him that caught her attention, not just his calm way of moving or the careful work he did, but something deeper. She watched him closely, trying to understand what made him so different. What surprised her most was his shadow. For years, Adunni had heard the whispers of many memory shadows, shadows that carried pain, regret, secrets, and old feelings. But his shadow was different. It was completely silent. It didn't cry or murmur. It didn't carry sadness or hidden stories. Instead, it seemed peaceful, living only in the moment, feeling the smooth wood beneath his fingers and enjoying every stroke of his chisel. That quiet shadow touched something deep inside Adunni's heart. It was a kind of calm she had never known before, and it made her want to learn more about this man and the peace he carried with him. Every morning after that, Adunni would walk slowly past Emeka's workshop. Sometimes she'd say she was fetching water, but mostly she just stood there, watching him work. She noticed how calm and steady he was. Something about him felt strange and different. She'd heard plenty of shadows whispering pain and secrets all her life, but his shadow? It was completely silent. No murmurs, no cries, just peace. No one else seemed to see it. The villagers talked about him, but only Adunni knew his shadow held no voice. She didn't understand why, and she didn't try to. She just wondered. Why was his shadow so quiet? What kind of man was this, with no echoes from his past? Sometimes, Adunni would find herself wandering slowly across the street, settling on a shaded corner or leaning against a weathered fence just to watch the stranger. She studied Emeka with quiet intensity, how his hands moved with gentle precision, how his feet stepped lightly on the red earth, and how his shadow, unlike any she had ever known, remained utterly still and silent. Every other shadow in the village told a story, whispers of joy, sorrow, or regret, but his held nothing but calm, like a secret kept too well. That silence both unsettled and fascinated her, pulling her gaze back again and again, as if trying to unravel the mystery he carried without a single word. One cool morning, as the soft light filtered through the dusty workshop window, Emeka paused his carving and looked up. His eyes, calm yet piercing, met Adunni's as she passed slowly by, the water pot balanced carefully on her head. She lingered just long enough, curiosity pulling her feet to slow. "Your shadows are restless today," he said quietly, his voice steady but gentle. Adunni's heart skipped. She nearly lost her balance, clutching the rough wooden frame beside her to steady herself. No one had ever spoken of the shadows before, those silent companions she carried like a hidden burden. You can see them?" Her voice was barely a breath, trembling with disbelief. Emeka nodded slowly, setting down his chisel. "I see many things," he replied, a faint smile curling his lips. "My grandmother taught me that a true craftsman must learn to see what is, what was, and what might be." He reached out, fingers brushing the smooth surface of a polished wood piece. Wood remembers. It holds the story of the tree it grew from, the storms it survived, the songs of birds that nested in its branches. He glanced again at the restless shadows clinging at her feet, dark tendrils weaving like smoke in a silent wind. But some things his gaze softened, some things hold on too tightly to yesterday, refusing to let go. Adunni felt a shiver ripple through her. For years, she'd heard the whispers and laments of shadows, pain, regret, secrets frozen in time. But no one else had ever acknowledged them. Now Emeka, the quiet craftsman with the silent shadow, saw what she carried too. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them, a fragile thread of understanding, delicate as the carving strokes Emeka made, yet strong enough to bind two restless souls. For the first time in years, Adunni sat down beside someone without waiting to be asked. Her hands trembled, and she almost let her water pot slip and fall. But something about Emeka, the way he saw her, truly saw her, made the world feel different. She had lived her whole life in Akpandem, surrounded by faces that never understood the whispers she carried. But now here was someone who shared her silence, someone who could hear what she heard without fear or pity. So they talked slowly, carefully, like two weary travelers finally finding a path together. Around her, the restless shadows quieted, folding in like old friends who had finally found peace. And in that stillness, the loneliness that clung to her like a second skin began to loosen its grip, letting her breathe lighter than she had in years. "They never stopped talking," she whispered, her voice soft as a sigh. "Every place where someone loved or lost, they leave their whispers behind. I haven't known real quiet since I was a child." Emeka nodded slowly, as though her words unlocked a familiar memory. "My grandmother used to say she could hear the songs inside wood," he said softly, his eyes gentle. "Every tree had its own music. Mahogany hummed like old men. Irako whispered like mourning women. Ebony," he tapped the piece he was carving. "Ebony sings in silence, like thunder far away." Adunni's breath caught. "How do you hear the trees?" she asked, amazed. "I only hear the shadows of humans, their pain, their memories. But trees? I've never heard them before." Emeka smiled, understanding the wonder in her voice. "Most people only hear one kind of shadow," he said. "But some of us can hear both, the shadows of humans and the shadows of trees. The trees hold stories too, but they speak differently. Their shadows sing in deep rhythms, slow and steady, like the earth breathing." He looked at her with quiet certainty. "It's not just about hearing. It's about knowing when to listen and when to let the shadows rest." Adunni leaned in, heart lighter. "What did your grandmother say about the songs?" Emeka's hands cradled the ebony carving. She said the songs were beautiful but heavy. Some carried so much sorrow she could barely sleep. So she learned to choose which songs to carry and which to leave behind. He lifted the dark wood in his hand. "This ebony remembers 100 storms. But when I carve, I don't carry the storm in my heart. I listen for the shape beneath the pain. I listen for what helps me bring the wood to life." Adunni's eyes drifted to Emeka's skin as he worked. The way the sunlight touched it, it was smooth, unweathered, fresh, like river-washed stone. It didn't make sense. She leaned forward, puzzled. But how is your skin like that? You hear shadows too, yet you don't look worn. Emeka smiled, still focused on the carving in his hand. Because I don't listen to everything. I only listen to what helps. The rest, I let pass like wind through trees. She blinked. How do you do that? He looked up at her, eyes calm. Practice and peace. But not today. Today I have too much work. Come back tomorrow and I'll show you. I'll teach you how to hear what matters and leave the rest behind. Then he paused, his voice softening. Adunni, you are beautiful, but you've been carrying too many voices. When you learn to let go, your beauty will return to you. It will glow from the inside. A quiet heat bloomed in her chest. She stood slowly nodding. As she walked home, the village sounds felt less sharp, the shadows less heavy. Her feet moved gently over the earth. And as she reached her doorstep and looked up at the fading sky, she whispered to herself with a small, certain smile, tomorrow, I'll go back. I'll start learning. I'll start living again. The next day, as Emeka's hands shaped ancestral masks and the village came alive with drums and dye, he began to teach Adunni, not with books or lectures, but with the quiet language of presence and patience. He showed her how to sift through the murmurs of the past, how to let go of the voices that were not hers to carry, how to tell the difference between a memory that meant something and a ghost that just liked to echo. It was not easy. The shadows had been her only companions for so long, their sorrow woven into the rhythm of her breath. Letting them go felt like mourning old friends. But every day she tried, sometimes with tears, sometimes with trembling, but always with courage. And then one morning the world shifted. She woke up, heart still, ears open, and for the first time in years, she heard silence. Not an empty silence, but a chosen one. The shadows were still there, like distant clouds across a clear sky. But they waited now. They no longer demanded. And she wept. Not from pain, but from the strange peace of finally being able to choose what to carry and what to let rest. For many moons, Adunni and Emeka had met beneath the wide sky, their days filled with quiet practice and shared laughter. Each moment they spent together, she felt herself growing stronger, the shadows around her softening into whispers she could understand. Emeka's hands moved skillfully over the wood, but it was their connection, the way their souls listened to the same silent language, that made her bloom like never before. They played like children, teasing and gossiping about the village, weaving secrets between them that no one else could hear. In those stolen moments, they were not just maker and shadow listener. They were two lost souls who had finally found one another. Emeka saw the beauty returning to her, not just in her face, but in the light that now danced in her eyes. And Adunni knew, deep in her heart, that she had fallen deeply in love with him. But now, as the masks neared completion, a cold shadow settled over her, a fear she could not ignore. Emeka's work was done. Soon he would leave, and with him, the quiet understanding that had filled the empty spaces of her world. The thought of losing him tightened her chest and blurred the edges of her smile. Then, one evening, under the iroko tree where their shadows stretched long over the red earth, Adunni gathered her courage and asked the question that had haunted her since the first day they met. The masks were nearly complete now, each one glowing with the quiet fire of ancestral memory. The village buzzed with the energy of the coming festival, drums echoing softly in the distance. But Adunni's heart felt heavy. The joy around her made her sadness feel sharper, more defined. That evening, as dusk spilled gold across the earth, she and Emeka sat beneath the old iroko tree. Their shadows stretched side by side across the red soil, touching but not tangled. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice barely louder than the wind. Emeka turned toward her, his gaze thoughtful. "My work here is almost done," he said. "I don't mean the carving," she whispered. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out at the village, the children playing with painted sticks, the women decorating the festival path, the air alive with preparation. Then he spoke. "I've been walking for years," he said, "from town to town, learning the language of wood, carving pieces I hoped would last forever. I thought I was looking for the one work that would make my name echo across kingdoms." He paused, the silence folding around them like a blanket. But now, he said slowly, I wonder if I was just looking for a place where my silence could live beside someone else's whispers. Not clash, not run, just rest. Adunni blinked back, the warmth rising in her eyes. For the first time, the noise in her soul didn't feel like a burden. It felt like music waiting for someone who could listen without fear. The next day, the Yam Festival bloomed in full spirit. The air was thick with the scent of fresh earth and roasting yams. Colorful banners fluttered in the warm breeze, and the village buzzed with laughter and anticipation. When Emeka's new masks were brought out, a hush fell over the crowd, then erupted into cheers. The masks seemed to glow, not just with paint or craft, but with a deep, almost spiritual energy. Eyes sparkled as everyone admired the fine, intricate carvings, each one telling a story older than memory itself. Even Chief Ease, who had summoned Emeka to create the mask, stood beaming, pride swelling in his chest. This, he said quietly, is a gift for the ancestors and the future. The villagers nodded in agreement, their joy painting the day in golden hues. All around, drums beat like ancient hearts, their rhythm rolling through the village like thunder waking the land. Dancers swirled and leapt, their movements so fluid and fierce that it felt as if the ancestors themselves had come to guide them. The festival path glittered with painted faces and shimmering beads, a living tapestry of tradition and celebration. But in the midst of the revelry, Adunni sat quietly to the side, watching it all unfold. Her smile was faint, almost fragile. Her eyes held a storm of questions. Would Emeka stay in Akpandem, or would he vanish again like a shadow at dawn? She didn't know what the future held, and that uncertainty weighed heavy on her heart. As the sun dipped low and the festival's wild song faded into the hush of evening, Adunni slipped away from the gathering. She walked slowly to the Hiroko tree, the village's ancient love tree, where Emeka often rested. The branches stretched wide like open arms beneath the star-speckled sky. She settled beneath its boughs, waiting, hoping. Night deepened, and the village grew still, but Emeka did not come. Minutes dragged into hours, and sadness wrapped itself around her like a cold cloak. Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she stayed, held by a quiet hope. Then, just as the moon reached its peak, soft footsteps approached. Emeka emerged from the shadows, his face calm and sure. I'm staying, he said, voice steady. I spoke to the chief. We're building a workshop here, a place for young carvers to learn, not just the art of wood, but the art of listening to memories without being crushed by them. Relief and joy blossomed in Adunni's chest, warming her like the fireflies that danced around the tree. They smiled at each other, a new chapter beginning in the hush of night. In the days that followed, their bond grew stronger. They walked side by side through the village, their happiness like sunlight breaking through the canopy. The women of Akpandem whispered and watched, their voices full of wonder. Look at their skin, they'd say, how it shines brighter than before. See how their eyes hold joy. Their gossip was soft but joyful, a celebration of love blooming in their midst. And through it all, the village felt alive with a new kind of magic, one born not just of tradition, but of shared hope and quiet promises whispered beneath the Hiroko tree. They were married at the next Yam festival, and the shadows danced with happiness. Even the baobab tree seemed to nod in approval. Adunni's gift didn't go away. She still heard the whispers of shadows, but now she could choose. She became the village's keeper of necessary memories, helping families, healing pain, and comforting hearts. And every evening, after the work was done, she and Emeka sat together under their favorite palm tree. He carved by lamplight, and she listened only to the sweetest shadows, children's laughter, lovers' promises, and quiet prayers answered at last. Their shadows, side by side, spoke of a beautiful present, a past at peace, and a future full of hope. The oldest women in the village used to say, gifts come with a price, but the wisest ones knew something even deeper. The best gifts become perfect when shared. And sometimes when the moon was full and laughter echoed from their home, it left behind a bright shadow of joy, a memory so warm it would whisper to Akpandem for generations to come. 2 years later, Adunni and Emeka welcomed a son they named Ikena, meaning power of the father. But from the very first moments, something about Ikena's shadow was unlike any they had ever seen. Twisting strangely, darker and fuller than it should be, as if it held secrets beyond their understanding. They watched him closely, hearts filled with both love and unease. Was this a sign of something beautiful yet unknown, or a shadow of danger waiting to unfold? In the quiet evenings under the baobab tree, they wondered if this child carried a gift or a challenge that would change Akpandem forever. Thanks for watching. I hope you are enjoying this video. Creating each video takes me a very long time and a lot of energy. From writing the script, carefully selecting and placing images, to editing every detail and finally uploading. It's a whole process done with passion, just for you. If you enjoy the video, you can support me by subscribing, commenting, liking, or sharing. It won't cost you anything. It's completely free. At the end, please score the video from 0 to 10, where 0 is the lowest and 10 is the highest. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me what you liked, what could be better, and what you think should be added or removed. Your feedback while you watch means the world to me and helps me keep making content you love. Thanks for watching, and I can't wait to bring you more great videos soon.